Thabisa Cele listened to the dial tone, her heart pounding. Please, she thought. Please let this work. The number she'd scribbled on a napkin was supposed to connect her to a pro bono lawyer, her last shot at getting back the business her ex-husband had torn away from her. But when the line clicked open, there was no cheerful receptionist. Just silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Then a voice cut through. Deep, steady, cold as winter rain. Speak. Her stomach dropped. This wasn't a lawyer. This was Gwan Yeo-woon, the man people in Seoul spoke about in hushed tones, the kind of man you didn't call unless you had a death wish. And she'd just interrupted him. Hours earlier, she'd lost everything. Her design firm, her reputation, her dignity, all of it stolen by the man she once trusted. Now she sat alone on her bed in a wrinkled red robe, debts piling up around her like debris, staring at that napkin like it might save her life. She'd been hoping for a miracle. Instead, she'd woken a dragon. Across the city, high in a penthouse drenched in cold blue light, Yeo-woon glanced at the unknown number flashing on his screen. He didn't do interruptions. He didn't do strangers. But something in that shaky, terrified breath on the other end made him stop. He didn't hang up. He waited. Before you find out what the dragon does next, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss how he deals with her enemies. The conference room lights buzzed overhead, drilling into Thabisa's skull, but that noise was nothing compared to the raw building inside her head. She couldn't stop staring at the screen. Her designs. Every single one of them. The draping she'd spent weeks perfecting, the way she'd woven traditional Zulu beadwork patterns into clean, modern silhouettes, it was all there. Except the name underneath read Minitsuk Choi. You'll notice the textures here are really pushing boundaries this season, Minitsuk said, like he was discussing the weather. He flashed that practice smile at the board members, the same one that used to make her feel safe. This wasn't just her boss talking. This was her husband. The man who'd held her while she cried over her mother's illness. The man who said they'd build something beautiful together. Now he was pretending she didn't exist. Thabisa's chair screeched as she shot to her feet. Your vision? Minitsuk, I drew those last night. You sat right next to me. The room froze. Minitsuk barely glanced her way. He tugged at his cuffs, and when he finally looked at her, it was with something close to pity. Thabisa, come on. We've been over this. You're exhausted. That sabbatical we talked about? I think it needs to be permanent. He nodded toward the door. 2 security guards stood waiting. They'll help you out. Your building access is already shut off. The shame hit her like a slap, but colder. Sharper. She wanted to scream, to grab those designs off the screen and shove them in his face, but her body wouldn't cooperate. She looked around the table, desperate for someone, anyone, to speak up. No one did. They all studied their phones, their notes, the wall. Anywhere but her. They knew. And they didn't care. Thabisa forced herself to walk out without falling apart. She kept her chin up, her steps measured. But the second the elevator doors slid shut, she crumpled against the wall and let out a sound she didn't recognize as her own. 10 minutes later, she stood on the sidewalk clutching a cardboard box while rain soaked through her shirt. No job, no husband. And without the company sponsoring her visa, she'd be out of Korea in weeks. Minitsuk had thought of everything. Her hands shook as she fumbled through her purse for her phone, but her fingers hit something else first. A business card. Thick, expensive. She pulled it out, plain black with a single line of silver numbers embossed across the front. No name. No company. Some frantic client had slipped it to her months ago, whispering something about, when the law can't help you anymore. She'd thought it was dramatic at the time. Maybe a private investigator. Maybe some shady lawyer. Now, staring at those numbers through the rain, it felt like the only option she had left. She had no idea she was holding a direct line to the Dragon of Seoul. And she definitely didn't know that making the call would be the most dangerous decision of her life. Rain hammered against Thabisa's window, relentless, angry, matching the chaos in her chest. The lamp on her nightstand threw soft yellow light across the room, the kind that usually made everything feel safe. Tonight it just made her feel exposed. She perched on the edge of her bed, red silk robe bunched around her thighs, staring down at the black business card like it might bite her. Those silver numbers glinted up at her. A lawyer, maybe. Or maybe something worse. At this point, what did it matter? She had nothing left anyway. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking as she punched the numbers into her phone. She squeezed her eyes shut, sucked in a breath, and hit call. She expected hold music. A bored receptionist. Something normal. Halfway across the city, the air was arctic. Gwan Yeo-woon sat at the far end of a black marble table, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Seoul skyline behind him like he owned it. Which, in most ways that mattered, he did. The penthouse was kept cold enough to make his men uncomfortable, he liked it that way. Kept them sharp. Right now, though, he was bored out of his mind. Some rival gang leader was sweating through his shirt, babbling about territories and shipping lanes, practically tripping over his own words under Yeo-woon's flat stare. Yeo-woon spun his gold lighter between his fingers, click, 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 barely listening. He was about 10 seconds from wrapping this up. Permanently. Then his phone buzzed. The room went silent. Nobody called that number. It was a ghost line, off the books, untraceable, known only to a handful of people who understood what dialing it meant. Yeo-woon held up one hand. The sweating man shut his mouth instantly. He pulled the phone from his jacket, frowning at the unknown caller ID. Interesting. He answered without a word. Hello? The voice on the other end was small. Terrified. Yeo-woon's fingers tightened around the phone. Is this the legal aid? Someone told me you help people when there's nowhere else to turn. He leaned back in his chair and flicked his eyes toward the door. His men didn't need to be told twice, they scrambled out like the room was on fire. The door clicked shut. Now it was just him and that shaky, desperate voice crackling through the speaker. Legal aid. He almost smiled. He was a lot of things, judge, executioner, the thing people whispered about in dark alleys, but a lawyer? That was new. Still, he didn't correct her. There was something about her voice. Something that made him want to keep listening. Who gave you this number? His voice came out low, rougher than he intended. Thabisa went rigid. That was not a receptionist. That voice was deep and dangerous and way too calm. It slid through the phone like smoke, and it made her skin prickle. A client, she stammered, gripping the phone so hard her knuckles went white. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bother you. It's just, my husband took everything. My business, my designs, all of it. I just need someone who'll actually fight for me. Yeo-woon moved to the window, looking down at the glittering sprawl of the city below. He should hang up. Track the call. Deal with whoever leaked the number. But he didn't. Instead, he stood there, listening to the raw ache in her voice. She wanted a fighter. She had no idea what she'd just called. Start from the beginning, he said, voice dropping even lower. And don't skip anything. The line cut off with a sharp click that rang out in the quiet bedroom. Thabisa pulled the phone from her ear and stared at the dark screen, her eyes wide with fear. There'd been no reassurance, no appointment made, just that deep voice telling her to speak, then silence that felt more like being judged than heard. After she'd spilled everything, the theft, the betrayal, deportation hanging over her head, all he'd said was "I see," before hanging up. The rush of adrenaline from confessing drained out of her, leaving her shaking and cold. She hadn't called legal aid. She could see that now. That voice didn't belong to someone who argued cases in court. It belonged to someone who owned the courts. She dropped the phone on the bed like it had burned her, pulling her knees up to her chest. She'd just told her darkest secret to a dangerous stranger, and the weight of that mistake made it hard to breathe. High above the city, the silence in the penthouse was different. Deliberate. Gwan Yeo-woon set his phone down on the black desk with care. He didn't need her name, he had people who could find that before she'd finished her first sentence. He typed something into his secure computer, and seconds later, the screen on the wall lit up with information. Thabisa Cele. 26, fashion lead. Married to Choi Min-suk. Yeo-woon's eyes narrowed as he read. He knew of Choi Min-suk. The guy was a parasite in the business world, a social climber who used his wife's talent to worm his way into places he didn't belong. The file backed up everything Thabisa had choked out between shaky breaths, the transferred money, the sudden firing, the visa cancellation set for next week. It was a messy, arrogant way to destroy someone's life. Yeo-woon hated a lot of things, incompetence, betrayal, unnecessary noise, but he saved a special kind of hatred for men who built their empires by stepping on the people they'd promised to protect. He clicked to the next tab and pulled up security footage from the lobby of Min-suk's office building from earlier that day. The grainy video showed Thabisa standing in the rain, holding a box of her things, looking small and beaten down against the grey city. But then he saw the moment she found the card. He saw something shift in the way she stood, a flash of fight, as she made the call. She wasn't weak. She was trapped. And by pure chance, she'd called the one person in Seoul with enough power to burn Min-suk's stolen empire to ash. Yeo-woon didn't believe in coincidences. He believed in opportunities. He pressed the button on his desk intercom. Secretary Kim, he said, his voice even and cold. Cancel my Tokyo flight. And get the car ready. We're collecting a debt. Sir, came the confused reply. A debt? From who? From someone who forgot his place, Yeo-woon said, his eyes fixed on Thabisa's photo on the screen. He wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't anyone's hero. But for the next 24 hours, he was going to be exactly what she needed. And find out where Choi Min-suk is celebrating tonight. I think it's time we crashed his party. The dragon had woken up, and he was hungry for payback. The knock on her door was not the frantic pounding of a landlord coming to collect rent, nor the hesitant tap of a neighbor. It was 3 sharp, precise raps that demanded an answer. Thabisa tightened her robe and opened the door a crack, revealing a man who looked more like a statue than a courier. He wore a uniform without a logo, his gloved hands holding a sleek, matte black box tied with a silver ribbon. He didn't speak, he simply extended the box toward her. When she hesitated, he gestured toward the street below, where a long, obsidian sedan sat idling, its engine purring with a quiet, expensive menace. You have 30 minutes, the man said, his voice devoid of emotion, before turning on his heel and marching back to the elevator. Thabisa carried the box inside, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She should have been terrified. She should have locked the door and called the police. But the police hadn't helped when Min-suk threw her out, and she had a strange, inexplicable feeling that the voice on the phone earlier, the one that had commanded her to speak, was behind this. She untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Nestled in layers of black tissue paper lay a dress of pure liquid silk. It wasn't the modest, beige tones Min-suk had always forced her to wear to dim her shine. It was a vibrant, deep sapphire blue, a color that commanded attention, daring the world to look away. There was no note, no explanation, just a small card with an address for one of the most exclusive private dining clubs in Seoul. It was a place where deals were made in hushed tones and fortunes changed hands over glasses of whiskey older than the men drinking them. Thabisa realized with a jolt that this wasn't a date, it was a summons to a battlefield. She shed her robe and slipped into the silk. The fabric moved like water against her skin, the sapphire hue striking a stunning contrast against her complexion. It fit as if it had been tailored for her body alone, hugging her curves and cascading down to the floor in a way that made her feel not like a discarded wife, but like a weapon sheathed in velvet. The ride to the venue was silent, the city lights blurring past the tinted windows. When the car finally glided to a stop, the driver opened her door, and the cool night air hit her face. Thabisa stepped out, her heels clicking rhythmically on the pavement as she approached the heavy oak doors. Inside, the private dining room was a cavern of shadows and cigar smoke, populated entirely by men in severe, dark suits. They were the architects of the city's economy, speaking in low, serious rumbles. At the far end of the room, she saw him. Min-suk was holding court, a glass of champagne in his hand, laughing at something a potential investor had said. He looked triumphant, basking in the success of a deal built on her stolen genius. Thabisa took a breath, steeling herself. She stepped into the light. The effect was immediate. The sapphire blue dress cut through the monotony of the black and grey suits like a lightning bolt in a dark sky. Heads turned. Conversations halted mid-sentence. The room didn't just notice her, it stopped for her. Min-suk's laughter died in his throat as he looked up, his eyes widening in a mixture of confusion and horror. She wasn't supposed to be here. She was supposed to be crying in her apartment, packing her bags. Instead, she stood in the center of his victory dinner, undeniable and breathtaking, waiting for the dragon to make his move. Min-suk snapped out of his shock fast. His surprise twisted into this cruel, amused smirk. He put down his champagne and walked over to Thabisa, shaking his head like she was some disobedient kid throwing a tantrum. Everyone was watching now, waiting to see what would happen. Thabisa, he laughed, this ugly, grating sound that cut through the silence. I knew you were desperate, but this? Crashing my dinner in a dress you obviously can't afford. He got right up in her face, his voice dropping to a nasty whisper. You're embarrassing yourself. Again. Go home before I have someone drag you out. Thabisa's hands curled into fists. She wanted to run, or scream, or something, but before she could say a word, Min-suk was already turning away. He waved dismissively at the 2 massive security guards by the door. Get her out, he said, sounding bored. And make sure she doesn't come back. The guards moved toward her, these huge shadows closing in. Thabisa stepped back, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. She was completely alone. The dress, the car, everything, it all felt like some sick joke the universe was playing on her. But the guards stopped. Just froze. Their eyes locked on something behind her. The heavy door swung open again, not loud, but slow. Deliberate. The whole room seemed to hold its breath. The temperature dropped. Gwan Yeo-woon walked in. He didn't look at the investors. Didn't acknowledge the guards. His dark eyes found one spot in that room, and suddenly all those powerful men looked incredibly small. He moved like a predator, quiet, controlled. His footsteps were the only sound. Min-suk frowned, clearly confused by the sudden silence. "Who are you?" he demanded, stepping forward to block the guy's path. "This is private. You can't just—" Yeo-woon walked right past him. Like Min-suk wasn't even there. Like he was furniture. He stopped next to Thabisa. She could feel the heat radiating off him, this dangerous energy that made her skin prickle. Slowly, he placed his hand on her bare shoulder, large, tattooed, possessive. Then he looked at Min-suk. His face was calm. Cold. Terrifying. "The dragon has arrived. If you're ready for him to destroy her ex, drop a fire emoji in the comments right now. Let's see who's Team Yeo-woon." Min-suk's confidence crumbled. He stared at that hand on Thabisa's shoulder, then at the black ink crawling up the stranger's neck. Recognition hit him. Then fear, real, bone-deep fear. He knew that tattoo. Everyone in the city knew that tattoo. The security guards were already backing up, heads down, refusing to even look at him. "You asked for security," Yeo-woon said, his voice low and rumbling, "the kind you feel in your chest. I'm here." He glanced down at Thabisa, his thumb brushing against the silk of her dress. "Is this the man bothering you?" The whole power dynamic in that room didn't just shift, it exploded. Min-suk wasn't in charge anymore. He was the one in danger. Min-suk stammered, his eyes darting around the room for help, but the investors had suddenly found their drinks fascinating, refusing to meet his gaze. I don't know who you think you are," Min-suk managed to choke out, though his voice lacked any real conviction. "But this is my company dinner. You have no right?" "Your company?" Yeo-woon repeated softly. The question hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. He reached into his jacket pocket, not quickly, but with a terrifying deliberation that made Min-suk flinch. He pulled out a single, folded document and dropped it onto the white tablecloth. It landed with a soft thud that sounded like a gavel. "As of 10 minutes ago, Choi Design Holdings was acquired by my firm. The transaction was expedited." Thabisa stared at the document, her breath catching. The logo at the top wasn't a bank or a competitor. It was the crest of the Gwan Syndicate. Yeo-woon took a step closer to Min-suk, his voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than any scream. "You built this company on stolen work. You fired the architect of its success to save a salary. That is not just cruelty, it is bad business." He reached out and plucked the champagne glass from Min-suk's hand, setting it aside with a look of distaste. "You are terminated, Mr. Choi. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out. Your access to the building has been revoked." Min-suk's face went pale, then red with humiliated rage. "You can't do this. I am the CEO. You can't just walk in here and—" He lunged forward, a desperate, foolish attempt to reclaim control. Yeo-woon didn't move a muscle. He simply shifted his gaze. It was a look of such absolute, frozen violence that Min-suk stopped dead in his tracks, his mouth hanging open, the words dying on his tongue. It was the look of a predator deciding whether to play with its food or simply end it. Min-suk swallowed hard, the fight draining out of him instantly. He was a small man in a suit, he was standing before a force of nature. Yeo-woon turned his back on him, dismissing his existence entirely. He reached into his other pocket and pulled out a set of heavy, magnetic key cards. He held them out to Thabisa. Her hands were trembling as she took them, the cool plastic heavy in her palm. "The new CEO requires a new office," Yeo-woon said, his cold eyes softening just a fraction as they met hers. "And I believe you have some designs to finish." Behind them, the security guards, Min-suk's own hirelings, stepped forward. They didn't look at their former boss with loyalty, they looked at the new owner with fear. "This way, sir," one of them grunted, grabbing Min-suk by the arm. The ex-husband, the man who had taken everything from her, was dragged out of his own victory party without a fight, leaving Thabisa standing in the center of the room, holding the keys to her kingdom, with the dragon standing guard at her side. The heavy doors swung shut, cutting off the stunned whispers from inside. Outside, the cold bit at Thabisa's skin, but she barely felt it. Her heart was pounding too hard. She looked down at the key cards in her hand, actually shaking, and pressed them against her palm until they hurt. Just to make sure this was real. Next to her, Yeo-woon was already calling for his car. He looked completely calm. Like he hadn't just walked into that room and torn apart everything Thabisa's ex-husband had built. Like this was Tuesday. I don't know what to say, Thabisa said finally. Her voice came out quieter than she meant it to. Thank you doesn't really cover it. You gave me my whole life back. She paused, searching his face. But I still don't understand why. He turned toward her. Didn't smile. Just looked at her with that same look he'd used on everyone inside, the kind that made you feel like he could see straight through you. Don't think I did this out of kindness, he said. I don't do charity. You did the work. You fought back. He stepped closer, close enough that she caught the smell of tobacco and something clean, like rain. But I want to know something. Out of everyone in this city, why did you call me? Thabisa's breath caught. She could make something up. Pretend she knew exactly who he was, that calling him was part of some plan. But looking at him, she knew he'd see right through it. I already told you, she said quietly. It was an accident. A wrong number. I was just trying to find someone, anyone, who could help. He studied her for a long moment, like he was deciding whether to believe her. Then something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. A wrong number, he repeated, almost to himself. Out of 10 million people in Seoul, you called me by accident. He seemed almost entertained by it. Then I guess fate owes me a favor. A sleek black car pulled up. The driver moved to open the door, but Yeo-woon waved him off and did it himself. He looked at her, one eyebrow raised. This wasn't just a ride home. This was a choice. Get in, he said. We're not done yet. We need to talk about what happens next with your company. Thabisa glanced back at the club entrance one last time. Then at him. Then she got in the car. The next morning, sunlight flooded the lobby of her building now, with both her name and the Gwan family crest on the wall. People turned to look as she walked through, but not like before. This time they looked at her like she mattered. She rode the elevator to the top floor, swiped the key card that actually worked this time, and walked into the office they'd locked her out of. She set down her box of designs on the big desk and looked out over the city. The same city that had tried to break her. She wasn't someone's discarded wife anymore. Wasn't the employee they could just throw away. She was in charge now. Down on the street, Yeo-woon leaned against his car, looking up at her window. He lit a cigarette, the flame catching the edge of the tattoos on his neck for just a second. He wasn't just watching an investment. This was something else. He took a drag and let the smoke drift into the morning air, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. Wrong number. Right person. So, here's the question. Yeo-woon doesn't do favors for free. What's he going to want from her? Drop your theories in the comments. And hit subscribe, part 2 is coming.